Welcome back to our County Commission chambers. I've missed this room for the past month or so. So happy to be back and have a work session. Just as a reminder for anybody who might be listening online or who's joining us for the first time, work sessions are just for informational purposes only. There is no action to be taken, and there's also not going to be any public comment during this time. It'll be a presentation and discussion amongst commissioners. And Jill, I believe you're the one kicking us off.
Thank you, commissioners. I'm really excited to be with you all today for what is an annual update on our partnership with Artists Helping the Homeless. But I think and we're happy to provide updates on the program to date. But I think one of the larger things we wanted to talk about today was some opportunities to evolve the partnership with Artists Helping the Homeless. Building upon a proposal that was submitted for the American Rescue Plan Act solicitation that the county facilitated. I hope I put some good background information in my draft memo, but essentially Artists Helping the Homeless in partnership with the Douglas County Sheriff's Reentry Office, which has been the lead partner on behalf of the county and managing our partnership with Artists Helping the Homeless. This agreement with the service agreement that the county has with Artists Helping the Homeless was designed to be a primary resource to Douglas County Reentry, Sheriff's Reentry, as having a methodology for next step housing for individuals that were being released that had a history of incarceration, history of houselessness, history of substance use disorder and or severe and persistent mental illness, and that had multiple visits to the correctional facility. And to date, that's been a very successful partnership. And we're happy to talk about that. But more importantly, wanted to talk about the potential and ongoing discussions that have been had to expand the partnership with Artists Helping the Homeless to be able to serve women. Carrie Nice with the Director of Reentry Services for Sheriff's Office is here today to talk a little bit about that and talk about the need to provide those services to our female population. And then we also have some folks here, some subject matter experts that Carrie's invited that we'll welcome up here in a few minutes to talk about their experiences and provide some kind of firsthand testament to why these services, these access to these resources is needed for our female population. In the cover memo, I talked a little bit about kind of the data that supports this ask. We have information in the needs assessment that was performed by the Corporation for Supportive Housing that talked about specific disparities of homelessness that are experienced amongst our female population in Douglas County. Those disparities stand out on a national level and a state level. Also that we have a significant need for supportive housing for folks that are exiting an institution or exiting our reentry population of folks. So there's a lot of overlap in that population. In which of those folks are exiting our criminal justice facilities that are experiencing homelessness. Sometimes they're being served by a variety of agencies, but more often than not, our reentry department is working really closely with those folks and trying to problem solve to have a safe place for them to recover and get on a better path when they exit the facility. I think everything that I see with our reentry office particularly since we started the partnership with Artists Helping the Homeless is that this has been a great resource to them. But I also see our reentry department working within other frameworks to try to house folks and problem solve, working within the continuum of care, the coordinated entry process, and collaborating with other agencies like Willow and Lawrence Community Shelter, Burt Nash, all the folks that they know they need to coordinate with to be successful. So I wanted to mention those things, and really, I think it's a good time for me to hand it off to Carrie and let her talk a little bit about the specific need for the female population.
Okay. Like microphones. That's okay though.
So I wanted to share a little bit today just about barriers that inmates face to successful release. Some of them we think about commonly and some of them are kind of overlooked sometimes. So not specific to females right now, but there are some here I have on the list that our females tend to face more. First is incarceration is disruptive to anybody who comes to jail. So housing, I would say, is our number one barrier for release. This can be because incarceration causes them to lose housing because they can't pay for it while they're incarcerated. Maybe their charges prevent them from going back to that place they lived at before, or it's unsafe for them to return there. So it's a variety of different ways that housing can become a barrier. But I would say 9 out of 10 folks we work with, housing is an issue. We're looking for somewhere safe and sober for them to go. Our men that we work with, our primary referral source is Karwu. I have some numbers. In 2021, we referred 61 individuals to him. He placed 45 of them. So he is our main source of placement for our men's population. Second, I would say would probably be Oxford House or Hearthstone, some kind of sober living. Back to the barriers, I would say loss of job. So when they're incarcerated, they obviously have no income. When you have no income, you cannot even meet your basic needs. So you're released into the community, even getting transportation, anything basic you're unable to do. Damage or loss of relationships. So this can come from being co-defendants with the people that you associated with before getting arrested. Losing family support or friends due to the charges or no contacts. Substance use disorder is also very prevalent with the population we work with. Sometimes coming to custody is their first time at sobriety. So they've never been sober before, or sometimes we refer to it as forced sobriety. They have to be sober. So exiting the facility sober not only increases your risk of overdose, that's like the highest risk point, but then trying to navigate the community and all of the resources can be so overwhelming. When you've never experienced just life sober before, trying to do it coming out of jail is very overwhelming for folks. Mental health, whether it's prior mental health concerns or those that have kind of evolved with the incarceration, a lot of times they can be made worse by being in jail and medication needs. Transportation is a barrier. We have a bus here in Lawrence, but when you have multiple requirements and restrictions to abide by, taking the bus all over town is usually not feasible. Medical needs, I mentioned doctor and dentist, but honestly, these kind of go by the wayside for people that are getting out of jail. That doesn't really make their list of priorities of something to address. Ongoing legal requirements, court dates, you may be on pretrial, starting probation, which comes with a whole host of restrictions. So making those court dates or understanding all of the requirements that you now have releasing from custody. Domestic violence concerns, this can go male or female. We usually traditionally think of the female with domestic violence victims, but we do see men with DV concerns, whether it's physical or emotional abuse. A lot of these folks have trauma in their history, which is a barrier to being successful, trying to address those things being newly released from custody. To our female population, they're more likely to be the primary caregiver to children. So losing that custody going into jail, whether that be a family member is keeping them or whether they go into the system, still overwhelming, not knowing what's happening with your children and just knowing that it's hard on the children as well. It's just the unknown, I guess you could say. And then also females typically experience the human trafficking more than men. So those individuals that are in custody that are either in that system or in that situation right now is a huge barrier to releasing successfully. Like I mentioned before, we primarily release to Oxford House for Women. We have the other resources in the community, but what we know is, I'm sorry, what we know is that housing in Lawrence is hard. Everything is full, everything is, at capacity. And so we do have the Housing Authority vouchers, the shelter, Burton Ash, Willow or Freedom House. But when you're released from jail, it's not always planned. And we are oftentimes day of looking for something, begging for a spot for somebody. So with having Carwoo for the men, I was going to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why his program is helpful to us. He talks a lot about the wraparound services that he offers. His program is peer-led. So those who work in the house are peers. Those peers are the ones that pick the individuals up from jail. So they actually meet them in the lobby, pick them up. They can relate to those people a lot better, and there's a connection there. They do all their transportation. It doesn't matter where they need to go. Carwoo takes them and then some. He provides medical and dental care through contracts of his own. His staff are very familiar with DECA and Burton Ash services, which makes it a little bit easier to access them. It kind of takes just a little bit off that barrier because they know how to not work the system, but they know how to access the system. Also, there's no fee to go to Carwoo's house in the first stage house. So inmates released from custody, they're able to go there and just take a deep breath. They're able to focus on their recovery versus when they go to an Oxford house, they have to work. I mean, work is immediate. Oftentimes reentry will pay or DECA will pay for the deposit and maybe 1 or 2 weeks rent, but it takes you 2 weeks to get a paycheck. So they often start out behind. So being able to go to Carwoo's house and not have to focus on the financial immediately is a big thing for recovery. They're engaged in the recovery community, so they attend AA, NA, Smart Recovery. They're currently, we started in August. Some of his peers are joining us in the jail to teach programs now. So they're teaching decision points with us and Smart Recovery right now as peers. So they teach alongside a case manager in the jail. And then lastly, probably not lastly, but the last thing on my list is engaging with the community volunteer opportunities. So they do a weekly volunteer project where they're doing something in the community to give back to our community, whether it's feeding at the homeless camp or gathering items or whatever that looks like.
Well, before we ask some of our guests to come up and talk, Wu, was there anything that you wanted to highlight, any successes of the last year and what you think the opportunities are?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I want to say is last year, the people we serve have paid back court fine for more than $7,000 back to the communities. So they're now willing to give back. One of my guy that I work with actually paid back all his hospital bills, which is a big deal. Two of them got back to school, they in school, and one of them actually bought a house, which you don't hear that when you have a homeless population from jail, they go back out after a year, bought a house. And 5 of them have bought their own car. And one of them paid back the child support. So those are the things that we take for granted, but the important thing I want to share is not only do they do better, now they're giving back to the society and the community. I think that's really important. And then the medical dental care is really important because when we get sick, we run to the hospital, when we run to the emergency room, but for a preventive is different. So we do the preventive part. So like you and I can just go to the doctor, they can't. So we have a doctor and dentist on staff. So every Thursday, every Friday, we will have them see them to do all preventive medical care. Every month, we provide the COVID testing and COVID shots. Every month, we provide HIV, STD testing. So we do all those. So it's to really kind of prevent costly medical expenses as well as good for their health. To me, that's really important. And transportation wise, in the first 5 months, we give out close to 2,100 rides in 5 months. So that means every day we're running everywhere, giving them to all the different appointments, making sure they don't miss the appointment, which is something we take for granted when we drive, but when they don't have a car. So that's really tough too. But it makes them, they can follow through what they need to get done. I think that's what we're here for. And then it's important that I think it's really wonderful when they finally they bought a car. It's like they never bought a car before. And for them to buy a house, it's not a cheap house, it's $250,000 home. It's just like, wow. So those are, I think that's what we try to do, is not just to help them survive, but help them thrive. I think that's really important. We can always lend a helping hand to help them survive, but we want our community member to thrive. I think that's the difference at what we try to do. So, but anyway, she's gave a very good proposal overall. Thanks.
And you will get a more comprehensive 2022 statistical report that gives you all the rides, successful discharges, unsuccessful discharges. He gives us those outcome reports every month. And then we have a quarterly meeting with Carrie and the rest of the team where we're making sure that we're modifying where need be and tracking success. So you'll get that later or early next year once we have all that put together. But I'm gonna take a step away and make room for our Carrie, if you want to welcome our guests up.
I think there's only one of them.
Oh, okay, Chris.
So I invited Chastity Schaefer with DECA to come join us today. She's a peer support specialist supervisor. She works with our behavioral health court and our drug court. So she encounters a lot of these individuals when they're released from custody and coordinates with reentry and whatnot. So I wanted her to kind of share her thoughts and whatnot on the barriers and things.
So looking at it on the substance abuse side, and the peer work that I do, we do, have some housing for men. But with women, they have a little bit more of those barriers. Like she was saying, the employment aspect of it, or releasing, not knowing when they're going to release. We have one right now that they reached out to me about, and I got them an Oxford interview. And so we see a lot of those barriers. We also see, like she said, I'm on the behavioral health court and drug court team. I apologize. I'm not on those teams anymore. But one of the requirements is sober, safe living. And a person gets out of jail and they might have an interview at an Oxford house, but they don't have the funds, and telling someone you have to get a job in 2 weeks, that adds a little bit more stress and a huge barrier. I didn't really realize myself until about all the different barriers and such until I did the reentry simulation. And I understand it a little bit more. And we have people constantly coming into treatment that they don't have anywhere to go, or they don't have their ID, or they don't have their proof of income, or those things. So they have trouble starting their treatment. And we're limited. So, I've seen these alternatives to incarceration work. And with the additional housing and transportation, I think that those that haven't been successful, that our success rates can go up higher. I have friends that are staff with AHH. And I've learned so much more about the program. And I have seen some of those same people, you know, buy houses, buy cars, pay off fines, you know, all those things. And not in comparison to the people that live in Oxford haven't done those kind of things. But they do have the barriers straight out the gate versus somebody that gets 30 days to get their things aligned, get their ID, you know, all of those things. So.
Chastity, thanks for joining us. Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
And maybe this is a question for Carrie also. You've talked about the difference in structure between Oxford House and what Artists Helping the Homeless structures their sober living as primarily around financial requirements and work requirements upfront. Is it only that, or is there also a capacity issue? I'm trying to understand kind of the multiple tactics to address the issues. So if sometimes Oxford House may be immediately available, but the financial is only the barrier, you know, the only barrier, and is there any advocacy around that or potential other resources, or is it also not enough capacity?
Yeah, I would say capacity is the biggest issue.
Okay.
We can usually find funding, whether it's reentry, DECA, behavioral health court or drug court. We can usually find funding to get them in and get them going. We do have what they call a reentry spot at Oxford, and we do have what they call a couch spot. So those are like no, we don't have room. No, we really don't have room. So the couch spot is free. They can stay there like 2 or 3 days in hopes that something opens up. They can immediately interview. They've already been there a couple days. It's highly likely they will get the spot that opens, but a spot doesn't always open. We had just a situation this afternoon at the jail where we got a phone call. We've been working with an individual. Attorney calls and said, "Hey, good news. He's getting out this afternoon." And it's like, okay, that's great. But Oxford is completely full. We called yesterday, we're completely full. I was like, call them again. You never know. They're completely full. Because the individual has some medical issues, we were able to get him an overnight spot at the shelter and then an interview with Hearthstone. But it's that type of stuff. There just is nowhere. Even for the somebody like you or I that works, that if we even wanted to go get a apartment right now, it is difficult. Even if you have what do they want? Like 3.5 times or 3 times the rent and all of the other things. So I would say capacity is the biggest.
That helps. I just wanted to know that
Yes.
it wasn't, you know, that we are funding enough programs elsewhere in our budget and community partners to make sure that money exists, if that's the only barrier, but I assumed capacity.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's growing.
So
And barrier.
we have,
Go ahead.
we have 4 women's Oxford houses. And each of them are chartered for maximum of 8.
7 or 8. Yeah.
Yeah, 7 or 8 depends on the house. So you have 8, you know, times 4 of them.
Yeah.
And they fill up pretty fast.
And they stay full.
They stay full. I am also Oxford alumni. So I do a lot with the houses here. And it is difficult, you know.
One way to look at the CARWU program as well is it's more of a transitional, so a support from like 30, 90, 6 months. And Oxford really is a step down from CARWU's house.
Right.
Yeah.
So in the men's program, they have Meraki House. So if you're not going to Meraki or it's full, Oxford is really the next best move. So with women, we're throwing them directly into Oxford. We don't have that kind of safe space that, okay, get here, get your stuff together, and then move on to the next step. So
The Oxford houses are self-run, member run. So it doesn't have the structure, they have the accountability, but they don't have that help, that push. Yeah, you go into an Oxford house, hey, you have 2 weeks, you got to get a job, you got to do chores, you got to do this. And sometimes somebody just getting out of jail and going to an Oxford house has too much freedom.
Yeah, I want to kind of address that too, is because our house, the difference is we are 24-hour monitor. So we have a house manager, we're a case manager that works in the house any given moment. If there's any surprises, any concerns, if the people we work with have a emotional challenge at the moment, we are right there to be there for them. Versus the Oxford House, you will be on your own. At the house we have is like 24 hours, day and night, we have somebody there for you. So I think that makes a difference. Or if they have an erratic thought at that moment, we will have somebody there, the peer will be say, hey, get your head clear. So I think that's kind of the difference too, because it's like, it's a 24-hour monitor and support housing.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So with what we're proposing, the expansion of services to women, I think there's a couple ways to think about this. I think the first way to think about it is that we've been talking about as a kind of a staff team is that it's going to require, a new set of folks. Karwu would definitely be a part of it, and his staff that are here because they know the community and they know the service partners. But figuring out what is that program that's going to be, it'll be an extension of the existing program, but it's going to be unique because it is for women. And so it's a matter of recruiting new staff, incorporating the different models that we know work here in Lawrence, but also hiring a new staff and getting them trained on the Artists Helping the Homeless model. So that's something that we've started talking about. And the way we've talked about it internally with our little project team is that I really think that Carrie is very well suited to lead that effort and work collaboratively with Karwu and some of the community partners, if that were the direction that we were to go in. The ARPA asks, and the way we look at the two asks through the ARPA project, there's a couple opportunities there. One of the requests that was submitted was ineligible ultimately, but that was to pay off the two mortgages for Kairos House and Meraki House and utilize the funds that would be freed up and incorporate those into a new either purchasing a women's home, a step one home and or a step two home, and using some of those ongoing operating funds to pay those mortgages. And we'd also have to enter into a fresh budget conversation with the county to expand the operational supports for that programming as well. So that's something that we've talked about. There's also the opportunity, there's a couple of scenarios here. And I think one way or the other, we just kind of wanted to have a conversation with the commission today, just to get a sense of what lingering questions you might have about the service model and get a little direction about how we could move forward as a staff team, if that makes sense. And I think Bob had one thing he wanted to share too, so I might let him come up. Okay. Okay.
So can you talk a little bit about how you accommodate families in this model? You talked that was a real barrier for females.
So we have had conversations around how that would work with children. Because the way that the First Step House works is that there's only capacity for 8. And if you put a child in there, it takes one of those spots. So as the initial place that we're going to use for transitional, I don't know what that would exactly look like. I think that we should plan for it, but I don't know that kids would be a part of that initial release from custody. If they are, then we can get the client to Karwu and then work with other partners like Willow and Family Promise to look at maybe if there's a better suited spot for them. We've had conversations with tenants to homeowners as well to work on some master lease options for transitioning that exact thing. So yes, families are a concern, but when we're talking the initial release, kind of like an emergency type, putting them there, families wouldn't be the number one priority. So.
How many beds are you hoping to provide for women
The capacity would be 8, so
in one house?
there's a permit involved and
Yeah, I think, for the first couple years of our agreement with Artists Helping the Homeless, it was a stage 1 house. So I think that's where that would be a logical first step, the stage 1 house. That's Kairos House now, and that can accommodate up to 8 individuals with 2 staff at any one time, according to the City of Lawrence's limited group home administrative agreement that we have in place. It was a couple years into our partnership with Artists Helping the Homeless that that Meraki House became available, and that was largely a problem-solving strategy on the part of Artists Helping the Homeless, because folks that were ready to leave the stage 1 house were not able to rent or afford. They weren't ready in their recovery process. But when they do transition to that stage 2 house, and I think that would be a goal for this project, similar to the trajectory of the men's services. But when they do transition to that stage 2 house, it does look a lot more like an Oxford house, but it's still a step up. And the individual is expected to pay, I think, what is it, $110 a month?
It's still very affordable, but we still provide all the service. We still take them to work. We still provide any wraparound service they need. The only difference, they pay a weekly rent. That's the only difference. But so they still get all the support. They still see our doctors, and with whatever they need, they're there. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
My apology. Yeah, so anyway, the second phase houses, we provide everything, the wraparound service. The only difference is they have to pay a weekly rent like an Oxford house rate. And so, but they can still build their life. And one of the things I'm very proud of them, when I first got them, their credit rating is usually below 400 or worse. Now, most of them between like 600-700, and so we teach them those things so that they can move on with life. And so and then we always teach them how to budget. So the 20-80 split is really important, because like you can only spend for the most 20% of your income, but everything else has to go to expenses. That's what real life is. And so they learn that, and they develop that habit and skill. That's why they can move forward more functioning. But I think the difference is we still provide all the services. The only difference is now that's the next step. Now in real life, you have to pay rent. That's it.
What's the anticipated length of stay at the primary house at the first?
We don't have a date on it. That's another good thing about us. We don't say that a lot of programs is 30 days, 90 days. We don't. It's individually tailored. So some people might take 90 days and can move forward. Some people might take six months. So it's case by case and what their supports are, but we don't judge. And we also try to encourage them to get education, vocational training. To me, that's important to build a longer term success so that they can have better career over time. So that's why in case they decide to go to college, we actually let them stay longer to kind of build those. And we actually work with Johnson County Community College. They actually work with us pretty closely to try to get the people back in college if they choose to. Of course, we work with locally here to go get vocational training as well.
6 to 9 months seems to be the magic.
Yeah.
Where when we've looked at this, and I think in 2021, that was the first better year, like non-COVID year, that we could look at. And 6 to 9 months seems to be more the average for folks, but sometimes it's less, sometimes it's a little longer, but that seemed to be the general consensus.
And then move into less supported housing, or then move into an Oxford house type of situation?
Well, usually this case by case again. If they want to move to Oxford house, we help them get to an Oxford house. If they want to move to our next phase, we let them move to the next phase. So it's their choice. And so that's what I think it's important, that we give them the choice. It's not like you have to do this. You say, what do you think is best for you? So it's their choice. They tend to do a little bit better because that's what they want, not what we want.
And
So-
sometimes they are able to have a exit to, community and with a successful landlord. But I think in most part, it's on a case by case basis, like we've said.
So we have resources for men and resources for women. Is there a plan for people who don't fit either gender category?
I think that's something we're gonna have to think about. Yeah, and I think as we move through the project, we will have to have take that kind of approach. Yeah, absolutely.
Jill, you mentioned the limited group home and the 8 cap. I know that the city is redoing their code right now. Has there been any discussion about looking at that number differently or looking at different? We had DECA here a while back talking about supportive recovery housing for women and families there. Has there been any further discussion about that?
I haven't looked at it. I should have thought of that. No, I haven't even thought about that. I think, yeah, just it's within the I need to look at that. So that's a really good idea.
I will say though, 8 in a house, the way the Kairos house works is a duplex and the staff live on one side and everybody shares a room on the other side. And that's 2 per room. So that it's comfortable. And I feel like when you try to cram more people in there and whatnot that are in recovery or they're just freshly out of custody, we would have to consider that as well. So just a thought about increasing, so.
Are all spots at both houses, well, maybe just the first house currently and prospectively with the women's program? Are all those spots filled by referred to and filled by reentry folks?
I would say 99% of the time, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
can you give me an example of like where else referrals might, I appreciate that that's dedicated space
Yeah.
and a necessary transition from in custody.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if other referrals happen, if sometimes that presses, you know, the capacity in terms of what the need is
So,
at the jail.
yeah, I have the.
I think sometimes when when the jail send them to inpatient, and so then the inpatient will call us back and then we'll accept them back
Got it.
from there. So, we
So
do
that's
have-
what you think the other 1% is, not necessarily
Yeah.
other community partners or programs making referrals. Okay,
Yeah, so I can count. So in 2021, 11 people, he served 11 people that had never been booked into the Douglas County Jail.
okay.
So just because reentry doesn't give the referral for an interview, we a lot of times give out CARWU's information. So if somebody's newly arrested and they literally haven't even been to their first court date yet, but they're like, hey, we want to go to CARWU, we have a sheet of information because they'll likely be released prior to sentencing and all of that. So they leave the jail with their little paper and they call CARWU and he meets them wherever in the community and interviews them.
So it's more of an indirect referral
Yes.
versus you being the person to bridge
Yeah.
that person out of the
Yeah.
jail and into the house. Okay.
Yeah, but in 2021, I looked through all of the data that he provided me, only 11 had never been. So those are just cold calls from the community essentially.
I appreciate that.
It's really neat to have a program that kind of harnesses your strengths and your personal commitment, but that's also a question of like, what happens next, or how do you expand if so much of it is kind of based on your personal dedication?
Well, I think that's one of the beauty of what I do is because everybody I hire a peer support. So they understand what they go through and they are very committed to partner with me to continue. We do have these conversations about like how to move forward. So we do have those planning. So the people I work with are all dedicated into it. So they're just waiting for me to go away.
Commissioner Willie, I would say that Douglas County is a member of the board of directors for Artists Helping the Homeless too. So I know like most of the time it's Bob participating in those monthly meetings and there's a strong sense of making sure that there's sustainability planning in place. But I really feel like this is it's an issue that just the fact that Artists Helping the Homeless has been able to replicate their programming here in Lawrence. I think they're halfway there in terms of building some sort of sustainability planning in a lot of ways, but we try to gently remind Wu not to try to do all the things.
I think Bob had.
You can go, I think you go to that one, Bob. I just got my.
Oh.
What I was going to say is because, we have participated in the board since this project started. And the board is not only interested in this succession issue, but then sort of also long-term capacity. And then I just completely lost my train of thought. What I've seen is some more work that's being done within each of the programs that Artists Helping the Homeless has to make sure that staff are doing more of the administrative and leadership piece that Wu has as a kind of inspirational leader in his role as executive director, and then also the person responsible for the, performance of the organization. It's something that I think that the board members are really invested in doing that work as a board. So I would just say that. Can I tell my quick story? Yeah, I just thought this was interesting. I've been waiting for the appropriate time to share this. So it's Christmas Eve. I'm in Walgreens on 6th Street. I was getting some chocolate to put in stockings, and there's a conversation going on over here with somebody who is printing out their Christmas cards, and I was getting stuff. So I was just kind of overhearing because they are having a conversation with somebody else, and they're trying to help somebody who's in the emergency room on Christmas Eve, because it was one of the Artists Helping the Homeless residents or somebody that they were connected to. It's 11:30 at night, and the two guys that work in the house are talking to each other, and they're trying to coordinate that, and the Artists Helping the Homeless van is in the parking lot. And it just struck me that this is what 24/7 wraparound service looks like. That those gentlemen live among the folks that are working through this program. They are, they're there all the time. And this idea of putting peers or people with lived experience within the congregate living situation is something we're experimenting with. We have somebody who's living in one of the cottages who's playing that role, and he's kind of informally providing peer support. But that means if there's somebody 3 o'clock in the morning who's creating a disturbance, this sort of organically of somebody who lives there is working with somebody else who lives there and avoiding a police call or what have you. So we've talked about this in the supportive housing models and conversations that we've talked about. Like, is there something we could learn from what happens in residence halls where you have a resident advisor and that person is intentionally living among folks? I think we've learned about the success of that by watching Artists Helping the Homeless model. I think we are asking ourselves, how do we help things like the Housing First pilot be a little bit more successful, because folks living in congregate living situations are a little more challenging. And so I know when Wu came here before, and I think it was Commissioner Kelly asked the question of like, why aren't we doing this already? Wu said, we need Artists Helping the Homeless to sort of show you how to do this, show you what's possible. I think that learning is really going on, and it allows us to sort of, build on this foundation. Artists Helping the Homeless has a peer fellow, female peer fellow working with Wu. That person is working at the camp. That person is meeting in smart recovery meetings, learning. So we're trying to plant the seeds with our existing capacity so that when and if there's another opportunity, we're prepped and ready for that. So I just thought that was, that we have ACT teams and we have intensive care coordination, and then we have this wraparound services. We need this tapestry of this, and transitional housing now is transition to what? Because until we have that permanent supportive housing capacity, then people get stuck or it takes longer. And that's just going to be the way it is for the next 4 or 5 years as we move through that. So I offer that.
Oh, I think it was my first meeting as a county commissioner when you came and presented Artists Helping the Homeless to us. And one of the things was that you were coming from Kansas City with the program that you had in Kansas City. How many houses do you currently have in Kansas City? Has that grown?
Yeah, we have one house in Jackson County, which is the first phase. Then we have an apartment complex, which is like 18-unit apartment complex for the second phase. I like to have the same apartment complex in Lawrence, but it is more challenging here to get that property. And so we also opened a house in Johnson County as well. And I also have a program in Douglas County that I don't own the house, but we provide all the service and house them in the, not Douglas County, Wyandotte County also. So we're actually kind of in all the different locations. And I personally, to answer your question, I personally don't run the house. All my manager runs them. I just overseeing them to make sure they run correctly. So to give me less work.
So I just want to make sure we frame this because we've had other conversations
Uh-huh,
around someone bringing a model into our community
uh-huh,
and using people within our community to make that model
Uh-huh.
work. And what you've done with Artists Helping the Homeless is bring your model, which started in another community, brought it to Douglas County, hired people in Douglas County to do that work and do that work here in Douglas County and be very successful. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I also think and has kept Douglas County staff like at the forefront of, steering those programs. And that's where I think, this partnership wouldn't be successful if it weren't for the sheriff's office and sheriff's reentry. And so I'm grateful that Carrie has stayed so invested in it, but I think she stays invested in it and the sheriff's office stays invested in it because it works. And it's keeping folks from reentering the facility. And I did want to say that one of the things that's a to-do is to do some better data reporting on readmissions into the jail and things of that nature. And so that is something that we haven't done the best job on tracking that, but Carrie's gone through all the numbers piecemeal, but we know we need to do that. But what I would say, and I won't let Carrie talk, but Artists Helping the Homeless is incredibly timely with their monthly reporting. Anytime we ask for data, they provide it almost immediately. They're an incredibly responsive partner.
Yeah, the data is actually, Matt Cravens has it. He has everything. So he's going to be looking at rearrest of those who go into the Carwoo house, and then how long we have, the length of stay, we have all of that information. So we're hoping that by March, when we come see you guys again, we'll have some of that information. 2021 was really our, first full year. So we have that data, and so he's got it. So one other quick thing I wanted to point out about Carwoo's house is the people that run it have gone through the program. So he doesn't necessarily hire from the outside. We have one specific reentry client that comes to mind that had used drugs for 25 years and entered into that program. And he is now a full-time employee of Carwoo. He went and he got a couple jobs. He worked in the hotel. He did a few other things, decided he wanted to go back to school and did that. Reentry was able to buy him a updated computer to be able to attend online classes. And now he's a full-time employee. So that bringing the peers from within our community, some of the guys that go to the house, they're like, oh, what are you doing here? And it's like, wait a second, like I can do this. That's the power of the peer model. So the guys that they're seeing and learning from are maybe old acquaintances or someone that they knew in custody. So
that makes me think of two questions. The first one is, I wonder what I suppose job recruitment has looked like for you. It sounds like it has been kind of an organic process of people successfully completing the program and being invested in wanting to continue to work. Beyond that, do you find that has been able to meet the capacity of the workforce that you need? And then do you have any specific concerns with being able to identify workforce for Women's House specifically? And I wonder, I don't know if reentry as part of your referrals, and depending on kind of the length of somebody's sentence or whether they're pretrial, how long they're working with reentry in addition to living there, what that sort of skill training or job placement might look like, and what you think about the sort of capacity potentially to help with referring the right people or helping locate peers for a female house.
Yeah, peers in Douglas County, we have them through DECA, we have them through RADAC, and we have them through Burt Nash. So they're out there. They are a little bit more difficult to find, but I know we already have one female working with Carwoo, but those would have to be kind of found within our community to kind of begin that work. Because you have no female house per se.
That was my follow-up
Yeah.
question. I didn't remember that you had a female house in
No, I
Kansas
don't.
City.
But the difference is I do work with a lot of female populations in Kansas City.
Just
and
not in housing.
But we just don't house them per se. I do partner with both UMKC, Rutgers College, and they send all the interns to me from the nursing student as well as the social work student to do practicum with me. And so some of those students has actually, now that I mentioned is they have expressed the interest to partnering with me to help me start the program in Lawrence as well. And I actually have a nurse that works in the house. And she also expressed the interest in guiding me, helping me how to start the house. So some of those basic needs, I think we have to start. I think we have kind of covered. Just like moving forward, how do we get people continuously? Because it's again, my emphasis is what they want, whether they want to work with us. Like the gentleman she was sharing is after he tried all these other jobs, then he decided this is what he wants. So we try our best to do that. So, but for in the beginning, I would say that I almost want to say I'm pretty comfortable because I have several female students and staff that actually express the interest. We're just waiting for it to become fruitful.
Go ahead if you had.
I was just gonna say too, I would lean on drug court and behavioral health court as well.
Mhm.
They have a lot of success there. And I could see that partnering very well. In fact, we haven't done it for the 2021 data, but something we were talking about looking at is the success of behavioral health court and drug court for those individuals that are in the Woo House. They love when we say they're going to the Woo House. They can't all go there, but because they know they're going to have that accountability and they're going to have that support. So are they more successful by using Woo's resources? We hope to incorporate that too.
So to that end, I'm interested about, I know we all talk about a lot of data and we ask staff and community partners to gather and keep a lot of data for us. And I appreciate that you have done that work and helped Matt Cravens with that. So you have data about who's been referred, what those outcomes have been, good or bad, length of stay, all that stuff. Do we have any do you have a sense on a numbers way, how many women have been, who have maybe fallen through the cracks and slipped through some
Well-
gaps in our system because you haven't been able to make those referrals? I know that's a little bit hard to totally land on a number. So
Yeah.
maybe I'm looking for something a little bit more anecdotal, but I'm just trying to get a sense of how common it is for you to, have somebody that you would make to a referral if this
Yeah.
hypothetical program existed for them. In addition to, now it leads me down this line of questioning about wondering about success rates with women and men in behavioral health court and drug court, if this has been such a helpful, supportive resource to go towards the success of some of the male participants, then where has the disparity? What's the disparity look like for that for the female participants? So those are kind of big questions, but that's my thought process.
Yeah, I can tell you, so we track the way we work with individuals two ways. So we track when we work with them in custody, and then we track when we work with them in the community. So for 2021, we served 46 women. And thus far in 2022, we've served 63 women. So it's there. But that's just kind of the numbers that I have as far as what reentry does. That's in custody and in the community. So.
Do you have numbers in front of you about men and how, I know that the volume is
I'm trying-
generally larger.
Yeah. And
Um,
so the women in the jail, so jail bookings or jail stays are about 27% women.
Yeah.
So ours looks similar.
Okay. That makes sense.
Some of the older data is skewed because we had the women's diversion program. And so we were working with more women
Mhm.
because of that. So that's kind of the best I have for right now, but it's still kind of at that it's still kind of that split.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful.
We have
Thank you.
more men than we have women.
Sure. And then, so we talked about there being 4 Oxford houses with 8 spots each for women. What does that look like for men currently?
It's
That's
less.
what- I thought it was less.
I think
Okay.
it's 3 houses. I think.
Yeah, all in Douglas County.
Yeah, and we've had good conversations in the past with Friends of Recovery, which is the Oxford House not-for-profit in Kansas. And they're all for expanding to Douglas County, but housing's really expensive. And they even have a hard time entering into affordable rental agreements with landlords. So they're usually like, yeah, we'd love to expand, but unless you can give us some referrals to some landlords to work with, because the disparity is pretty dramatic. I think there's like 3-4 times as many in Shawnee County.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Which, and to, I mean, illustrate the impact of that point, since most folks are being referred to Oxford House or Artists Helping any sort of safe, sober living through reentry, it's usually a condition of release or part of their sentence perhaps. And sometimes the release conditions are also limiting in where you can live or access services. And so when we have a bunch of people that are ordered to stay here, even if there are open spots in the 20+ houses in the neighboring county, that remains inaccessible.
Yeah, that was my question. If we had access to beds in other counties or if that is off limits. And it sounds like
Well-
some of those would be by condition of release.
Yeah, no, we can apply to Oxford houses in any county. And reentry will support them in that. We get people who end up here that want to go back to Johnson County. We'll help them get that spot and get them over there. It's just when you access services like DECA and Burt Nash, you have to live in Douglas County. So if we put them in a Shawnee County house, there's not much we can do for them. Even if it's temporary, they would need to go to like Vallejo or whatever the services are there. So keeping them here is best, so.
Commissioners, I wanted to, I know we're getting to close to our time boundary, and I think, we can, we'd like to come back with a proposal, and maybe I'll just have some follow-up conversations with Sarah. But we'd like to, the way we're thinking about this project, if we were to get any kind of support for one-time support to either pay off the 2 mortgages or one of the mortgages, any kind of one-time support would be a benefit to the program, and operating funds that are currently dedicated to paying those mortgages would be freed up and would be either available to offset the county's existing agreement for the men's services and to start exploring how to grow the women's version of the program. I think, just talking at a staff level last time we met before planning this conversation, Carwu is always looking for houses. So he's always ready to buy a house. But in terms of growing the program, I think realistically, from a timing perspective, we know that we would have to come back to the county commission and, as part of the budget process, ask for additional operating funds, and you'd have to consider that along with all the other requests for the operating funds. From a timing perspective, I think, realistically, we would be looking at very close to starting the beginning of 2024 and growing a whole new program like this and hiring the staff and training the staff. It could realistically take that long. It may not, because Carwu also likes to move really quickly. He's a go-getter. But I think we're just trying to think through the different scenarios here and be as flexible as possible.
Well, thank you all. Any lingering questions from commissioners at this time? Okay, well, thank you all for being here with us. Appreciate all your work and look forward to more conversation next year.
Thank you.